Today we will be replacing the alternator in my 1999 Toyota 4Runner. This repair should be similar to any third generation 4Runner that has the 3.4 liter V6, may also be applicable to some Tundras and Tacomas. Now, a few days ago I was driving down the road and the battery light on the dashboard came on, indicating that there was a problem with the alternator. Eventually the vehicle died as it was just running on the battery power. So today we're going to be replacing with a remanufactured Toyota alternator. This is going to be part number 27060-621-0-84. And the tools needed should be fairly simple. It should just be a 14mm, a 12mm, and a 10mm socket. Additionally, you're going to need the ratchet and potentially an extension. And depending on what alternator you get, you might also want some electrical grease. You can see that this one actually already has some in this connector, so we should be good to go. And to give just a little bit more context, my 4Runner has about 260,000 miles on this alternator. It is the original. I picked up a remanufactured one as opposed to a auto parts store alternator because I think if the original lasted 260, a remanufactured one should last that same amount of time. It is more expensive. This one was $180 plus a $75 core charge. I will be sending back my original alternator though. I've already contacted the Toyota parts department, and as long as I pay the shipping to get it back to them, they will give me a $75 credit that I can use for future part needs. And the first step is going to be to pop the hood and disconnect the battery. And so I'm going to remove the negative battery terminal, set it off to the side. Now I've also gone ahead and turned my wheels to the left full lock. There are some comments on the online forums that say it's easier to get to some of the alternator bolts if you come in here and remove some of the shielding, so I went ahead and did that just in case we need to. Okay, so here's our alternator, and our first step is going to be to disconnect the electrical connection on the back side of the alternator. And so here's a bit of a better view. That's our clip right there, so we're going to squeeze it and slide it out. Okay, so we have disconnected the rear electrical connection, and I did actually come through the fender well with a flathead. I stuck it straight through this gap right here and then pushed the top prong of that connector. Okay, so now we're going to remove this plastic clip, and I just took a flathead and kind of popped it off, and it should just pull back away, exposing that nut. And so now to disconnect that wire, we will take our 10mm and loosen up that nut and slide it off. And so now you should be left with something like that. My plastic clip that covers that connection just fell into the skid plate, so I'm going to go and retrieve that now. Got it. At this point we have 3 bolts left that we want to be focused on. The first is going to be a bottom 12mm bolt. The second is a tensioning bolt on the right hand side that we can access through the fender, or you can reach down with a socket and get it. And our fourth one is the 14mm up top, and that's the pivot bolt. So once that one is loosened, what you'll see is this entire unit can loosen like that, and now your drive belt is super loose and you can take it off. So again, your alternator is going to be oriented in the engine bay like this. It's like that. This bottom bolt is a 12mm nut, and it runs all the way through and connects with the tensioning bolt that comes in from the side over here. And you just need to loosen that in order to pull this unit out and to allow tension to be released in that drive belt. That 14mm is right up here, and it runs all the way through, and so once that is loosened just a little bit, this should be free to swivel like that, and now we will remove our drive belt. So right there is where the 12mm tensioner bolt will rest. So once it's loosened, it will drop down and hang below. and then just one more view of it here from the wheel well. Head of it will be on the opposite side of that U, and then the threads will go through the U, and as you turn it clockwise and tighten it, it will tighten up the tension in that belt. Alright, and so there's the nut off the bottom of the alternator. And we'll pull our drive belt off. And it's always good to inspect this belt and see if there's any wear or fray. Mine is good, so I'm not going to worry about it. And so now I've got the 14mm out. This one was actually coated in a little bit of oil coming from my valve covers, so it actually assisted in removal. And so at this point, it's basically just a friction fit with this top, we'll call it a flange for where the 14mm was. And so we're gonna have to slide this out. It's pretty tough, but see if we can get it. Okay, so we have removed the alternator from right here. It's now just sitting right here. There's one other piece that I missed, and I'm gonna zoom in, see if you guys can see it here. It's this little rubber grommet that goes into the back of the alternator, and you can actually see it here on the new one. It fits right into this hole right here, so I'm gonna try and pull that out without ripping it. All right, so after a lot of wiggling and a little bit of jiggling, we've got the old alternator out. Also, to give a little bit of a better explanation on how this tensioner bolt works, your alternator is going to be installed like this on the engine, with me being the back half of the engine pointing forward. Your 14mm is going to pivot on the top, and then that 12mm nut that we took off is going to go on this tensioner bolt, and you can see it's a T. So this slides through that bottom hole like that. 12mm goes on. This tensioner bolt slides down into that U-shaped groove, and then you slowly tighten it up in order to tighten up the tension on the belt that drives the alternator. One last comment here, there is a black piece of metal that fits in right here, right by the exhaust manifold. It is two 10mm bolts. I removed it to give a little bit more clearance when taking out the alternator. Some people will also take out the battery and a battery tray. I was able to have enough real estate where I didn't need to do that, and all I removed was that black piece of metal. So now to start the assembly process, I'm going to put my 14mm back on the top side of the alternator and slide it back in place down here. Alright, now we will use our 14mm now that we've got it started, and we will put it back on. Okay, now that we have the 14mm snugged up, not tightened, we are going to put on the tensioner bolt and the 12mm nut that goes on the bottom. And so right there you can see that we've got the tensioner bolt in place. That 12mm nut has been tightened down. So now we're going to start to put the wires back together and then tighten everything up. So there we are. I pushed that little rubber grommet back into place on the alternator, and I also slipped our top electrical connection over top. Now I'm going to take the 10mm nut and put it on, and then put our plastic cap back on. And so that's tightened down with the 10mm nut. And I almost forgot about this plate, so I'm going to put that back in. And now we'll put on the electrical cap. So now at this point, we just want to make sure that this belt isn't too loose. So I'm going to tighten up the 10mm tensioner bolt, which is just down here below. Make sure there isn't too much slack. Then I'll tighten up the 14mm pivot bolt, and one more time I'll check the 12mm down below, and we should be good to go. Now the belt tension is pretty important. If the belt is too loose, you'll have slippage and it's going to wear the belt prematurely. Likewise, if it's too tight, there's going to be too much tension in the belt and it's also going to wear prematurely. So there are tools out there where you can actually gauge the tension in the belt. I'm just doing it by feel and by what I've seen online and what I've done in the past when I've changed out my water pump. So I think we're pretty much good to go at this point. Make sure as you tighten up all of your bolts, you actually connect the electrical clip in the back. I actually had forgotten but I just put it in. Again, it's right here in the back, so you can always give it the pull test just to make sure that it is in fact clipped in, and with that we should be able to give it a test. So it took me a couple of tries to get the belt tension just right. Had to tighten it up a little bit in order to make sure that it had stopped squealing. But that is how you change out the alternator on a 3rd generation Toyota 4Runner. It should take about an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending on your level of skill. I think if I was to do it again, I could probably get it done in about 30 minutes now that I know all of the ins and outs. I hope this video was helpful to you guys. If you think there are any ways that I can make it better, please feel free to leave them in the comments. With that, I will see you in the next one.